Her fingers were small, shaking as they tightened around his sleeve, smearing red across black velvet. The child's breath came in broken gasps. Fear swallowed her words before she forced them out. "Please," she whispered. "They took my mother. She's downstairs." Laughter died around the table. Crystal glasses hovered inches from pale lips. Conversations dissolved into a hush so complete it felt unnatural. Every predator in the room slowly turned, not toward the child, but toward the man she had chosen to touch. She should not have been there. She should have been dead. Instead, she stood clinging to Draven Valemont, the Vampire King. A ruler feared for centuries, a creature known for mercy only in legend. His expression did not change, yet the air itself seemed to tighten, as if the manor were holding its breath. No one spoke. No one dared, because if the child was telling the truth, then something forbidden was happening beneath their feet. And if Draven chose to descend into the basement himself, whatever waited below would not survive the night. Stay with this story until the end, because what the Vampire King finds will force him to confront a horror even immortality cannot numb. The banquet hall glowed with a false warmth, chandeliers dripping crystal light over polished marble and linen, so white it looked untouched by time. Long tables stretched beneath vaulted ceilings, heavy with silver platters and dark red wine that caught the light like fresh blood. Laughter drifted softly through the air, measured, cultivated, never too loud. This was refinement perfected over centuries, elegance sharpened into a weapon. They sat like royalty, these vampires, dressed in tailored suits and silk gowns, their movements precise, their smiles rehearsed. To an outsider, it might look like a gathering of wealthy aristocrats indulging in excess. But beneath the perfume and velvet lingered something feral, an unspoken hunger held tightly in check. Every laugh carried teeth behind it. Every polite nod concealed calculation. At the head of the table, untouched plates cooled. No one ate until he did. Draven Valemont sat in stillness, his presence quiet yet absolute. He did not need to speak, to command the room. The vampires closest to him angled their bodies subtly in his direction, as flowers leaned toward the sun without realizing it. Conversations near him softened, then stopped altogether. Those farther away spoke only in murmurs, careful not to draw attention. He wore black, severe in its simplicity, embroidered only faintly at the cuffs. Old symbols, older power. His pale hands rested on the table. Fingers relaxed, but no one mistook that calm for weakness. It was a stillness of something that did not need to prove itself. A lesser lord lifted his glass too quickly, the faint tremor betraying him. He noticed at once, color draining from his face as his eyes flicked toward the head of the table. Draven did not look back. He did not need to. The glass was lowered, the mistake swallowed whole. This was how hierarchy worked here, not through proclamations, but through instinct, through fear so deeply ingrained it felt like reverence. Marcus stood a step behind the king's chair, posture rigid, eyes constantly scanning the room. His loyalty was visible in the way he never fully relaxed, never let his attention drift. On the opposite side, Celeste leaned against a marble column, one leg crossed over the other, her expression unreadable. She watched everyone, including Marcus, including Draven, with the detached focus of a blade resting in its sheath. Servants, human and vampire alike, moved in careful patterns, refilling glasses, clearing plates that remained untouched. None met Draven's eyes. The humans especially kept their heads bowed, keenly aware of how thin the line was between guest and meal in a place like this. The conversation at the table turned, as it often did, to politics disguised as gossip, border disputes between covens, whispers of disappearances in the lower districts, complaints about unruly fledglings who needed discipline. The words were smooth, but the meaning beneath them was sharp and cruel. Order, one noble murmur with a smile, must be maintained at all costs. A few chuckles followed. Approval, understanding. Draven listened without reacting. His gaze drifted across the room, cool and distant, as though he were observing a painting rather than living creatures. He had heard these conversations for centuries. The same fears, the same ambitions, dressed in new language each time. Power always sought to justify itself. A servant stumbled near the far end of the table, a tray rattling as a glass tipped and spilled wine across the marble floor. The sound rang louder than it should have. The servant froze. Every eye shifted, not to the mess, but to Draven. Time stretched then. The servant's breathing grew shallow. His hands, shaking as red, pooled at his feet. He waited for permission to exist. Draven's gaze finally moved. Just once. It passed over the servant like winter wind, cold and impersonal. "Clean it," he said quietly. Relief hit the room like an exhale. The servant dropped to his knees at once, scrubbing desperately, gratitude and terror warring in his expression. Mercy had been granted, but only because it cost the king nothing. The feast resumed, though a tension lingered beneath the surface now, a reminder how quickly comfort could be stripped away. Deep beneath the manor, something thudded softly against stone. It was distant, almost imperceptible, but the sound traveled upward through ancient foundations, through bones of earth and bricks soaked in secrets. No one at the table acknowledged it. Some did not hear it at all. Others pretended not to. Draven felt it. A faint disturbance, like a wrong note in a familiar song. His expression did not change, but his fingers still where they rested against the linen. For a moment, brief enough to be missed, his attention drifted downward, through layers of stone and shadow. Then the moment passed. The wine continued to flow. Smiles returned. Laughter rose once more, thin and bright. Above ground, the vampire elite celebrated order, control, tradition. Below, something patient and hungry waited. And in this world, where elegance masked brutality and power was measured by silence rather than speech, one truth reigned unchallenged. Mercy was not a virtue. It was a weakness few survived. The doors should not have opened. They were tall, reinforced oak bound with iron, designed to keep sound in and the world out. When they swung inward on their hinges, the sound cut through the hall like a blade drawn too fast. Every conversation faltered. At first, no one understood what they were seeing. Only a small shape silhouetted against the light of the corridor beyond. Then the smell reached them. Fresh blood. Human. Unmistakable. The child took 2 steps into the hall and stopped, as if the weight of the room pressed against her chest. She was small, no more than a handful of years old, dressed in a simple pink dress now darkened at the hem. Her curls clung to her cheeks, matted with sweat and tears. Thin streaks of red ran from beneath her eyes, smeared across her skin where she had wiped at them with trembling hands. She looked lost. For a heartbeat, the vampires only stared. Then instinct stirred. Some leaned forward unconsciously, pupils dilating. Others stiffened, jaws tightening as they fought the reflex to bare their teeth. Hunger rippled through the hall, sharp and immediate, colliding violently with the iron rules of the crimson table. No one moved. The child's gaze darted wildly from face to face, her breath coming in shallow, panicked bursts. She did not understand what they were. She only understood that she was surrounded by monsters, and that turning back was no longer an option. Her eyes found him. Draven Valemont sat exactly where he had been moments before, unchanged, untouched by the sudden shift in the room. Yet something about him drew her in like gravity. Perhaps it was the stillness. Perhaps it was the way no one stood between him and her. Or perhaps, in her terror, she had sensed the truth instinctively. This one is the most dangerous, which made him the only one who could help. She crossed the distance between them in a rush, small shoes slapping against marble too loudly, too fast. Gasps sounded around the table. Someone half rose from their seat before freezing, caught by the invisible boundary of Draven's presence. The girl reached him and grabbed his sleeve. Her fingers were slick with blood as they clenched the dark fabric, leaving faint crimson marks against black. She clung to him as if letting go would mean falling into something endless and dark. The room went dead silent. Wine glasses hovered midair. Breath stopped. Even the chandeliers seemed to still, their light suddenly harsh. She tilted her face up toward him, eyes wide and shining, lips trembling as she struggled to speak. When her voice came, it was small and broken, scraped raw by panic. "Please," she whispered. "Please help me." Every vampire in the hall watched Draven now. Not the child. Him. Because this was the moment that mattered. The moment when instinct and law collided. The moment when a single command could turn mercy into massacre. Draven looked down at her. Up close, the details were impossible to ignore. The bruising beginning to bloom along her arm, the way her chest hitched as she fought to breathe, the blood drying in uneven lines across her cheeks. Human blood. Fresh. Clothes. Something twisted, faint but sharp, deep in his chest. Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard, forcing the words out. They took my mama. A murmur rippled through the hall, quickly smothered. Some faces darkened with annoyance, others lit with interest. A few showed something closer to fear. Please, she said again, tighter now, as if the word itself were all that was holding her together. She's downstairs. They're hurting her. Downstairs. The word landed heavier than it should have. Draven felt it then, an almost imperceptible shift inside him, like ice fracturing under pressure. His gaze flicked, just once, toward the stone floor beneath their feet. The sensation from before returned, sharper now, no longer ignorable. The child's grip tightened, as if she sensed his attention drifting. I didn't know where else to go, she whispered. They said you were the king. The title echoed to the hall, unspoken but absolute. King. A few vampires lowered their eyes. Others watched with naked calculation, gauging what this interruption might cost or earn them. Hunger warred with fear in equal measure. No one dared reach for the child. Not yet. Marcus shifted behind Draven, tension threading through his posture. Celeste straightened from the column, her gaze flicking between the girl and the exits, already thinking in terms of violence. Draven said nothing. The silence stretched, thin and dangerous. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his hand. Several vampires flinched, bracing for blood. Instead, his fingers settled lightly over the child's wrist, not to remove her hand, but to steady it. The contact was minimal, controlled, yet it sent a visible shock through the room. He had touched her. The girl gasped softly, startled, then froze, eyes locked on his face. Whatever she saw there made her cling tighter, not looser. Draven's expression remained composed, but something had shifted behind his eyes. The cold detachment that had defined him moments earlier cracked, just enough to let something old and unwelcome bleed through. Memory, regret, a child's face, long buried beneath centuries of rule. The hall waited, and for the first time in longer than anyone present could remember, the Vampire King did not look bored. He looked awake. Draven did not move. The hall remained frozen around him, but his attention had already withdrawn inward, pulled by something the child's presence had torn loose. Her small hand still gripped his sleeve, warm, trembling, alive in a way the world around him no longer was. The sensation unsettled him more than the blood on her skin. For a moment, the centuries fell away. He was no longer seated at the crimson table. He was standing in a different hall, long ago, when the stone was newer and the throne unclaimed. Sunlight, Real sunlight, had spilled through high windows then, touching banners that no longer existed. He could almost hear the sound of laughter again, high and unguarded, echoing where silence ruled now. A child had run toward him without fear, not begging, not bleeding, laughing. The memory struck with a precision that hurt. He saw small hands reaching for him, not because they needed protection, but because they trusted him completely. He remembered lifting her, the way she had pressed her face into his shoulder, utterly convinced that nothing in the world could harm her as long as he was there. He had believed it too. That was before the crown, before the war that had demanded a king instead of father, before the covenants fractured and the old treaties burned, before every voice had turned toward him, demanding judgment, command, blood. They had told him it was temporary, that sacrifice was the price of survival, that one life, one fragile mortal life, could not outweigh the fate of their kind. He had listened. He had chosen the throne. By the time he returned, the room had been empty, too quiet. The air still carried her scent, fading unreachable. He remembered standing there long after the torches had burned low, staring at nothing, knowing with a clarity that never dulled that power had cost him something he could never reclaim. The world had named him king that night, and something inside him had gone hollow. The memory loosened its grip slowly, reluctantly, releasing him back into the present. The banquet hall came into focus again. The marble, the chandeliers, the predators waiting for him to decide what kind of monster he would be tonight. The girl was still there. Elsie. Her name surfaced without effort, as if it had always been waiting. She looked impossibly small beside him. Her fear a living thing he could feel through her touch. The way she leaned into him was achingly familiar, the same instinctive trust he had once destroyed with a single choice. He studied her face more closely now. The blood, the bruises, the raw terror she was trying so desperately to contain. She was holding herself together through sheer will, driven by love fierce enough to push her into the heart of a nest of killers. For her mother, the parallel was unmistakable. Once, he had been asked to protect someone who mattered more than the world. Once, he had decided the world mattered more. The vampires around him waited, sensing the shift even if they did not understand it. Some grew uneasy. Others watched with sharpened interest, aware that something old and dangerous had been stirred. Draven's grip on the table tightened just slightly. The linen wrinkled beneath his fingers. He had ruled for centuries without hesitation, without regret allowed to surface. He had told himself that detachment was strength, that compassion was a weakness the crown could not afford. And yet here it was, standing before him in a blood-stained dress, daring him to fail again. Elsie's voice was softer now, barely audible. "I don't want her to die." The words cut deeper than any blade. Draven lowered his gaze to her, truly looking this time, not as a ruler assessing a problem, but as something far older and far more dangerous, remembering what it had lost. The hall seemed to recede, the weight of countless eyes fading beneath the pull of that moment. He realized then that this was not about law or order or the fragile balance he had spent centuries enforcing. This was about a debt, one he had never paid. Slowly, deliberately, he straightened in his chair. The movement was subtle, but it sent a ripple through the room. Spine stiffened. Breath caught. Everyone felt it. The sense that something irreversible had just begun. Draven Valemont had already failed one child. He did not intend to fail another. Draven rose from his seat. The movement was unhurried, almost casual, yet it sent a visible ripple through the hall. Chairs scraped softly against marble as vampires instinctively straightened. Conversations that had tentatively resumed died again, snuffed out by the simple truth that the king had made a decision. His gaze did not leave the child at his side as he spoke. "Open the basement." The words were calm, final. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then one of the guards nearest the far wall shifted his weight. Another glanced sideways, eyes flicking toward a companion, instead of obeying. The hesitation was brief, but in this room, it was deafening. Draven's eyes lifted at last. They were no longer distant. "Now," he said. The guard swallowed and moved, boots echoing too loudly as he crossed the floor. Others followed, though not without unease. Marcus stepped forward as well, his expression tightly controlled, hand resting near the weapon at his side. He did not look at Draven, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. This was not a command he had expected, or wanted. Celeste fell in behind them, silent as ever, though her eyes narrowed as they passed the edge of the hall. She was watching the guards more than the corridor ahead, reading the small tells, tight jaws, stiff hands, the kind of readiness that had nothing to do with protocol. Elsie stayed close to Draven as they moved, her fingers still curled in his sleeve. He did not tell her to let go. They left the glow of the banquet behind and entered a narrower passage, the warmth of the hall replaced by stone chilled with age. Torches lined the walls, their flames guttering as if disturbed by something unseen. The deeper they went, the thicker the air became, heavy with damp and an undercurrent of something metallic. Blood. The passage should have ended there. Draven knew the architecture of his own manor. He had overseen its expansions, its renovations, its fortifications across centuries. The corridor before them, sloping downward at an unnatural angle, was not part of any plan he remembered. "This wasn't here," Marcus said quietly, more statement than question. Draven did not respond. His attention was fixed on the door at the end of the passage. It was massive, forged of dark iron etched with symbols worn nearly smooth by time. Locks layered upon locks sealed it, mechanisms far older than the manor itself. This was not a door meant to keep intruders out. It was meant to keep something in. One of the guards stepped forward to unlock it and hesitated again. "Sir," he said, voice low, strained, "we were told this level was restricted." "Told by whom?" Draven asked. The guard's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes flicked, just briefly, toward another figure in the group. Celeste noticed. Marcus did too. Suspicion crept in, cold and unwelcome. Draven stepped past them all, placing his hand against iron. The metal was warm beneath his palm. That alone was wrong. "Move," he said. The locks disengaged one by one, each click echoing down the passage like a countdown. When the door finally groaned open, a wave of air rushed out, stale and fetid, carried with the unmistakable scent of rot and old magic. Elsie whimpered softly. Draven stepped forward, drawing her instinctively behind him. Beyond the threshold, a stairwell spiraled downward into darkness, far deeper than the foundation should have allowed. The walls were carved not with stonework, but with symbols, ritual markings layered over one another, scratched and burned and carved with obsessive precision. "This goes far below the manor," Marcus said, unable to hide the unease in his voice now. "Yes," Draven replied. "It does." The torches flickered violently as they began their descent, shadows twisting and stretching along the walls. Each step downward felt heavier than the last, as if the earth itself resisted their presence. Somewhere below, a low, rhythmic sound pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat not meant to exist. Draven felt it clearly now, the disturbance he had sensed above, no longer distant, no longer subtle. Whatever was waiting below had been hidden carefully, deliberately, and with help from someone who understood the inner workings of his rule. Someone close. He tightened his grip around the hilt of his power, old instincts sharpening into something lethal. "They did want me to see this," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. No one argued, because with every step deeper into the dark, it became increasingly clear that whatever lay at the bottom of the locked basement was not merely a secret. It was a betrayal. The stairwell ended abruptly, opening into a chamber that should not have existed beneath any civilized structure. The air hit them first. Thick, stagnant, layered with the copper tang of blood and the bitter residue of old spells burned into stone. It clung to the lungs, making each breath feel invasive, as though the room itself resented being inhaled. The torches along the walls flared violently as they entered, then settled into a sickly, uneven glow that revealed too much and not enough all at once. Elsie pressed her face into Draven's side. Before them stretched a vast underground chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. Massive iron frameworks rose from the floor like the ribs of some long-dead beast, fused with pipes, chains, and sigils carved deep into blackened stone. The machinery hummed, not loudly, but persistently, an endless, low vibration that resonated through bone rather than ear. It was alive, not in the way flesh was alive, but in the way hunger was. Draven stepped forward slowly, his gaze sweeping across the room with controlled precision. What he saw tightened something ancient and dangerous in his chest. Humans were suspended throughout the chamber. Some were bound upright against rune-etched pillars, others laid across metal slabs that pulsed faintly with crimson light. Tubes disappeared into veins. Chains bent to wrists and ankles. Their chests rose and fell unevenly. Shallow breaths drawn by bodies pushed far past endurance, but not allowed the mercy of death. They were not prisoners. They were components. A woman whimpered softly somewhere to the left. The sound echoed, swallowed by the machinery, reduced to background noise in a system designed to extract suffering as efficiently as blood. Marcus swore under his breath. Celeste's jaw clenched, her hand slowly curling into a fist. Even she looked unsettled now. "This is impossible," Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. The energy output alone would require a continuous source. Came a smooth voice from the shadows. "Yes, exactly." The figure stepped forward as if summoned by the words themselves. Malric Thorne emerged from behind one of the towering constructs, his movements unhurried, almost reverent. He wore dark robes embroidered with arcane patterns that glimmered faintly in the low light, stained at the cuffs with old, dry blood. His face was sharp, composed, eyes alight not with madness, but with purpose. "Your Majesty," he said, inclining his head just enough to mock courtesy. "You weren't meant to come down here." Draven's gaze locked onto him, cold and lethal. "Explain." Malric smiled, thin and pleased. "This," he said, spreading his arms wide, "is evolution." He walked alongside the machinery as he spoke, fingers trailing lovingly over iron and rune alike. "You rule through restraint, through balance. You keep our kind small, hidden, controlled." His eyes flicked briefly toward the bound humans. "I saw an opportunity to transcend that." Draven followed his movement, every instinct screaming violence held barely in check. "You built this beneath my home." "With help," Malric replied lightly. "Vision requires collaboration." Marcus stiffened. Malric stopped before the largest structure at the center of the chamber. It pulsed brighter than the rest, veins of red light traveling through its framework like blood through arteries. At its heart, symbols glowed in a rhythm synchronized with the labored breathing of the captives. "The blood engine," Malric said, pride unmistakable in his voice. "A living conduit, pain refined into power. Human suffering converted into pure, renewable energy." Elsie made a small, broken sound. Malric glanced at her, curiosity flickering briefly across his face. "Ah, the child. That explains the disruption upstairs." Draven took a step forward, the air around him shifting, darkening. "You enslave them," he said, voice low and deadly. "You bleed them dry without killing them. For what?" Malric met his gaze without flinching. "Domination." The word landed heavy and deliberate. "Not chaos, not rebellion." Malric continued. "Control. Imagine it. An empire sustained indefinitely. No secrecy. No treaties. No need to hide in the dark while cattle walk freely above us." He gestured toward the humans again. "They are fuel. Nothing more." The machinery throbbed louder, as if in agreement. Draven felt something inside him snap into terrible clarity. This was not ambition gone too far. This was not a misguided grab for power. This was ideology, a belief that mercy was a flaw to be corrected, that suffering was simply an untapped resource. A line had been crossed here that could never be stepped back over. Malric watched the realization settle over the king's face and smiled wider. "You see it now," he said softly. "This was never about ruling the night." He leaned closer to the humming engine, its crimson light washing over him like a benediction. It was about owning it. Draven felt her before he saw her. A pull, sharp and unmistakable, threaded to the humming machinery, tugging at something old within him. His gaze shifted instinctively toward the far side of the chamber, where the blood engine's crimson glow burned brightest. There, suspended at its core, bound by chains etched with runes that drank in light, was a woman. "Elsie," he said quietly, already knowing. The child lifted her head from his side, hope flaring so suddenly it was painful to witness. Her eyes locked onto the figure in the chains, widening as recognition cut through her fear. "Mama," she breathed. Elena hung barely conscious, her dark hair matted against her face, her skin pallid beneath streaks of dried blood. Tubes ran from her arms and spine into the engine's central chamber, pulsing faintly with each shallow breath she managed to take. The chains were not merely restraints. They were conduits, feeding directly into the heart of the machine. She was not just connected to it. She was sustaining it. Draven's breath slowed to something dangerously controlled. He stepped closer, every sense sharpened, cataloging the damage with brutal clarity. Her heartbeat was erratic. Her veins glowed faintly beneath her skin, lit from within by the magic being siphoned from her blood. This was not simple torture. It was consumption, measured and precise, designed to keep her alive just long enough to be useful. Malric watched the realization dawn with open satisfaction. "She's remarkable," he said conversationally. "Most subjects burn out within hours. But her blood, he tapped a finger lightly against the engine's casing. She resonates. A natural conduit. Rare." Elsie started forward. Draven's hand closed around her shoulder instantly, firm but gentle, stopping her before she could reach the machinery. She struggled for a moment, panic flaring as she realized how close her mother was, and how far. "Mama!" she cried, her voice cracking. "I'm here." Elena's eyelids fluttered. It took visible effort, but slowly, painfully, her eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, clouded with pain and exhaustion. Then they found Elsie. Tears welled instantly. "My little star," Elena whispered, the words barely audible from the engine. "You shouldn't be here." Elsie sobbed, reaching out with both hands, fingers grasping for empty air. "I got help," she said desperately. "I told him. He's the king. He'll fix it. He'll save you." Her faith was absolute. Draven felt it like a blade pressed to his spine. He looked at Elena then, truly looked at her, not as a component, not as a variable in Malric's equation, but as a mother fighting to stay alive long enough to see her child one more time. Their eyes met, and in that brief connection, understanding passed between them. She knew, whatever was being done to her, she understood the cost. "Please," Elena said softly, her gaze flicking to Draven. There was no fear in it, only resolve. "Don't let him use me." Malric's smile faded slightly. "Careful," he warned. "She's integral. Remove her improperly, and the engine collapses." "And everyone else with it," Marcus said grimly, staring at the other bound victims. "Correct," Malric replied. "The release would be catastrophic." Elsie shook her head violently. "No," she said, tears streaming freely now. "You promised. You have to save her." Draven knelt slowly in front of her, bringing himself level with her gaze. The movement was deliberate, reverent even, as though approaching something sacred. "I will," he said. The words were quiet, unyielding. Behind him, the engine throbbed louder, as if sensing defiance. Malric's eyes darkened, irritation creeping into his composure. "You don't understand," he said sharply. "This machine powers everything. Remove her, and you doom them all. Hundreds, thousands, eventually." Draven rose to his full height. The temperature in the chamber dropped. His eyes burned now, no longer distant, no longer restrained. Rage coiled within him, vast and ancient, held in perfect control only because he chose it. "No," he said. "You did." He looked back at Elena once more, then at Elsie, at the hope still trembling in her small frame, fragile and unbreakable. Saving her may doom everyone else. The thought settled over him with terrible clarity. And still, his decision did not waver. Because this time, he would not choose the world over a child. Not again. Malric's confidence did not shatter immediately. It sharpened. Draven felt the shift before he saw it. The subtle tightening in the air, the way the machinery's rhythm altered, sinking not just to blood and pain, but to intent. Malric took a step back, not in retreat, but in invitation. "This is where you misunderstand me, Your Majesty," Malric said calmly. "I was never alone." A slow clap echoed through the chamber. Once, twice. From the shadows near the far stairwell, a tall figure stepped into the crimson glow. His movements were unhurried, his expression composed, almost regretful. He wore the insignia of the inner court, the mark reserved only for those closest to the throne. Varric inclined his head slightly, not in respect, in acknowledgement. "The crown doesn't extend this far down," he said. "You taught us that yourself." Marcus turned sharply. "You..." Several guards moved at once, not toward Malric, toward Draven. Steel whispered free of scabbards. The sound rang louder than the machinery now, cutting through the chamber with brutal clarity. The line had been drawn, and it was not where anyone had expected it to be. Elsie gasped. Draven did not move. His gaze shifted from Varric to the guards fanning out behind him, men and women who had sworn loyalty in blood and oath. Some looked conflicted. Others looked resolute. All of them looked ready. "You would raise your weapons against me," Draven said quietly. Varric met his eyes without hesitation. "Against stagnation," he corrected. "Against a king who mistakes restraint for virtue." Marcus stepped forward instinctively, placing himself half a step in front of Draven. "Stand down," He ordered the guards, voice sharp. "This is treason." One of the guards hesitated. Another lowered his weapon slightly. Then Varric spoke again. "Marcus," he said gently, "you've seen what he's done here. How long did you think Malric could work without protection?" Marcus froze. The implications settled heavily. "You knew," Marcus said, disbelief bleeding into anger. "You knew about this." Varric didn't deny it. "I sanctioned it." The word hit harder than any blow. Celeste shifted her stance, boots scraping softly against stone. Her gaze flicked between Varric and Draven, then to the blood engine still pulsing behind them. Calculation burned behind her eyes. "Choose carefully," Varric continued. "This machine represents the future. An end to hiding. An end to scarcity. You can stand with progress or with a relic." The guards tightened their formation. Draven felt it then, the full weight of isolation. The crown, the title, the centuries of authority meant nothing here. Underground, surrounded by secrets he had not known, power had shifted quietly, patiently, until it was ready to bare its teeth. Marcus turned slowly. For a terrible moment, it seemed as though he might step away. Then he drew his blade and turned it outward. "No," he said. "I stand with my king." The first strike came instantly. Chaos erupted. Steel clashed against steel as guards surged forward, some breaking ranks, others pressing in harder. Celeste moved like a shadow, intercepting one attacker with brutal efficiency before pivoting to block another. She said nothing, her choice made in motion rather than words. Draven stepped back, positioning himself instinctively between the attackers and Elsie. Power coiled beneath his skin, ancient and volatile, restrained only by precision. He did not unleash it yet, not while Elena and the others were still bound to the engine. Varric watched the violence unfold with cool detachment. "You see," he called over a clash of blades. "This is what rule looks like without fear." Draven's eyes locked onto him, burning. "No," he said, "this is what betrayal looks like." A guard lunged. Marcus took the blow meant for Draven, grunting as steel bit into his side. He stayed on his feet, teeth bared, fighting on despite the wound. Elsie screamed. The sound tore through the chamber, raw and terrified, cutting to the clash of metal and magic alike. For a heartbeat, everything seemed to slow. Draven felt something snap. The crown meant nothing underground, but the king was still very real, and he was done being patient. The blood engine changed its rhythm. Not louder, clearer. The hum that had once blended into background sharpened into something deliberate, purposeful, as if the machine had finally been acknowledged and was pleased by the attention. Runes flared along its frame, one after another, igniting like veins filled with fire. Malric spread his arms, face alight with reverence. "You've only seen the intake," he said over the chaos, his voice carrying unnaturally well. "What you stand before now is the culmination." The machinery responded to his presence. Chains tightened. The bound humans convulsed as one, a wave of pain rippling through the chamber. Their cries rose together, not random, not chaotic, but synchronized. Draven felt it then. Not just power, control. The blood engine was not merely harvesting suffering. It was imprinting itself onto every living mind connected to it, weaving pain into obedience, fear into permanence. This was no generator. It was a throne. Malric stepped closer to the core, placing his palm against the glowing sigils. When activated fully, he said almost tenderly, "This network expands outward. Every human within range becomes tethered. Their will dampened, their resistance erased." Varric's eyes shone with grim satisfaction. "An entire city," he said, "bound, quiet, endless." Elsie cried out as Elena's body arched against the chains, a strangled sound tearing from her throat. The engine surged, feeding on the spike of agony. Draven froze. For the first time since descending into the depths, he did not move, because now he understood. Destroying the engine outright will release everything it had absorbed, every ounce of pain, every fractured mind, every twisted spell, back into the world at once. A shock wave of enslavement, uncontrolled, permanent. It would spread. It would consume. Saving Elena might condemn thousands. The choice settled before him, vast and merciless. Elsie clutched at his coat again, sobbing. "Please," she begged. "She's hurting." Draven closed his eyes. For a fraction of a second, he stood in that long-ago room again, sunlight on stone, a child's laughter echoing where screams now lived. He remembered the weight of a crown settling onto his head as something precious slipped from his grasp forever. He opened his eyes. "No more," he said. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Power answered him instantly. The air fractured as Draven released centuries of restraint. Ancient magic tearing free, like a storm unbound. The temperature plummeted. Stone cracked. Torches extinguished as darkness surged outward from him in waves. Malric stumbled back, shock flashing across his face for the first time. "You can't." Draven moved. He crossed the chamber in a blur, seized Malric by the throat, and lifted him effortlessly from the ground. The runes on Malric's robes flared, trying to protect him. They failed. "This was never about power," Draven said, voice layered with something vast and terrible. "It was about domination." His grip tightened. Malric screamed as his magic unraveled, his body withering under the weight of judgment centuries overdue. The sound cut off abruptly as Draven crushed his throat and cast him aside like refuse. Malric hit the stone floor hard and did not rise. The engine surged wildly, reacting to its architect's death. Cracks spiderwebbed through its frame as Draven turned his focus to it, hands lifting slowly, deliberately. Runes burned white-hot, resisting him, fighting to exist. "Marcus," Draven said without looking back. "Get the child out." Marcus didn't hesitate. He scooped Elsie up, holding her close as Draven's power intensified. Draven reached into the engine, not physically, but spiritually, grasping the core spell that bound it together. He felt the minds trapped within it, felt Elena's presence, fragile but defiant. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then he tore it apart. The destruction was not explosive. It was surgical. Draven unraveled the spell layer by layer, severing the enslavement threads, isolating the stored energy, and collapsing it inward. The engine screamed, not in sound, but in sensation, as centuries of stolen suffering were swallowed into nothingness. Chains shattered. Tubes ruptured. The crimson light dim flickered and died. Elena fell. Draven caught her before she hit the stone, lowering her gently to the ground as the last of the machinery collapsed into inert ruin. The remaining captive slumped free, unconscious but alive. Silence followed. Heavy, absolute. Draven knelt beside Elena, pressing 2 fingers to her throat. Her pulse fluttered, weak, but there. She lived. He bowed his head, just once. This was the moment that defined him forever, not as king, but as something far rarer. A guardian who chose mercy when the world demanded sacrifice. The silence that followed the destruction of the blood engine was not empty. It was heavy with consequence. Stone dust settled slowly through the chamber as the last echoes of magic faded into nothingness. What remained of the machinery lay twisted and lifeless. Iron ribs collapsed inward like a carcass stripped of its purpose. The runes carved into the walls dulled and cracked, their glow extinguished forever. Draven stood at the center of it all, unmoving, as if the weight of what had been undone required stillness to fully exist. Orders were given quietly. The basement was sealed, not merely closed, but erased. Draven's magic fused stone to stone, collapsing passages, burying the chamber beneath layers of earth, and warding that would never be disturbed again. The manor above would stand, but the rot beneath it would be entombed, denied memory and myth alike. The survivors were carried out carefully. Elena was among the first. She lay unconscious but breathing, color slowly returning to her skin as the influence of the engine released its grip. Marcus carried her himself despite his wound, refusing assistance, his jaw set with the determination of a man who knew he would be judged later, and accepted it. Varric did not leave under his own power. He was dragged from the ruin by guards who had chosen too late, his defiance stripped away, replaced by something hollow and afraid. Draven did not look at him as judgment was passed. Exile was denied. Death was denied. Instead, Varric was bound, his power severed, his influence erased, condemned to live and remember what his ambition had cost him. Some fates were worse than endings. Malric's body was never recovered. No one asked where it had gone. By the time they emerged into the upper halls, dawn was beginning to pale the high windows. The feast had long since ended. The table stood abandoned, wine congealed in forgotten glasses, silk chairs pushed back as though the room itself had recoiled from what had been revealed beneath it. Elsie stood in the center of the hall, wrapped in a cloak far too large for her, her small hands clenched tightly together. When she saw her mother being carried in, she broke free from Marcus's side and ran. "Mama!" Elena stirred as Elsie reached her, eyelids fluttering open just long enough to see her child's face. A faint smile curved her lips before exhaustion claimed her again. Elsie sobbed openly, pressing her face against her mother's shoulder, clinging as if afraid the world might still take her away. Draven watched from a distance. He did not approach. Not yet. This was their moment, when Elena was taken away to be treated. Elsie remained behind, standing alone in the vastness of the hall. She looked smaller now that the danger had passed, the adrenaline drained from her thin frame. Slow footsteps approached. She looked up. Draven stopped a few paces away, lowering himself to one knee, so they were eye to eye. The movement was unpracticed, awkward in its sincerity. "She's safe," he said quietly. Elsie nodded, wiping her face with her sleeve. "You didn't let her die." "No," he said. "I didn't." She studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching, thoughtful in a way only children could be. "Are you still the king?" Draven considered the question. "Yes," he answered finally, "but I will be a different one." She seemed satisfied with that, without hesitation. She stepped forward and hugged him, arms wrapping around his neck with fierce, uncomplicated trust. The hall went utterly still. Draven did not pull away. He rested one hand lightly against her back, steady and protective, feeling something unfamiliar settle into place within him. Not weakness, but weight, responsibility freely chosen. Above them, the sun crept higher, its light brushing the edges of a world that had narrowly avoided damnation. Some kings ruled through fear, others through mercy, and in the quiet aftermath of blood and stone, the vampire king learned the difference.